Okay, part 2 of our ESC solder up. The next step here, I've got everything mounted in the car, positioned where I want it. It's all taped in. You can see we got our 30 gram cap, and we're also using the stock cap. It's all positioned. I positioned the ESC with a little bit of a gap to the waterfall. That way the sensor wire is not pinched up against anything. I kind of like to have the sensor wire where there's a room between it and any of the other wires, so there's nothing riding up right up against it. Make sure it keeps getting a good clean signal. And so I've tucked away the A, B, and C phase wires. We'll mess with those here in a bit, but what I want to do here first is go ahead and connect the capacitor into the main power wires going into the ESC. The first thing that you're going to make sure you have is some on this one, the proper heat shrink to go around both wires, and you have to put this on first. So on this one, it looks like a 3/8 inch wide heat shrink, about an inch long piece. That's what I'm going to use for each one of these. So you want to put these on the main ESC wires first, so you don't forget about that. So the negative terminal is closest to us right now, and the farther one is the positive terminal. So we'll get those down on there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in just above those pieces of heat shrink, and I'm going to cut a little window, a little rectangular window into the insulation of the wire, so we can solder in our capacitor right into that. It'll actually be the negative here. So we're going to solder right into that window, and then we're going to run the heat shrink up over it and shrink it down. And that's pretty much as simple as what that'll be. Let's go ahead and do that. Probably put in about a 1/2 inch wide window. I would say it's about a 1/2 inch. Okay, so you can see we got a little window here. Be careful you don't cut into the wire too deep, because you definitely can start breaking the strands. Okay, so like I say, this is our negative terminal, and you look down here. Now on some of the capacitors, they come with bigger wire. Some even have 10 gauge, like some of the 60 gram caps have 10 gauge wire already on them. I'm not really sure if that's the best way to go. So far from what I've tested, I've ran like TQ13 wire on them, and it seems to be just fine, and it's quite a bit easier to work with. So I think the wire going to the cap doesn't have to be as big as 10 gauge. This here on this little 30 gram cap is just 16 gauge, and this is just a 3/5 turn motor, so I think it'll be pretty adequate to go ahead and hook it up this way. So we'll just run these up here. Make sure you got a little bit of slack, obviously. Make it so it's going to look clean, and figure out where you want to cut it off at and go for that. And then I'd strip this wire back probably a good 3/8 to close to a 1/2 inch. Okay. Alright, and then we just make sure it's going to fit in there nice. It looks like it will. Okay. So now, one of the things I've learned about soldering that will help a lot is using liquid resin. Trinity sells this stuff. There's probably plenty of other places you can get it. This stuff helps you out a lot. That and a really good soldering iron. I have a Hacko soldering station. I have it set at 890 degrees. I just kind of run it all the way up, and if you're quick about it, it seems like you get really good results. When you run the soldering iron that high a heat, you have to be pretty quick, or it'll burn the elements out of the solder, and it won't look shiny and look nice. And for solder, I'm using the Capacitor brand. This is a 60% tin, 40% lead rosin core solder. Put that in the camera there. So, and the only other thing that's real nice is these Battey nails clips, alligator clips. This thing's nice because it actually has tension on it, so it will hold wires for you, and you don't have to put pressure on the clamp itself to hold the wire. So this is another nice little trick. So first thing you want to do is we're going to tin this wire. You don't really have to put resin on it to tin it, but it just makes it go a little quicker. 2 drops of resin on there. I get my iron here. Make sure you keep it clean, wet sponge, keep it clean. If the solder sits on here too long and it starts to turn gold, it's time to just go ahead and start over and just clean it off. So I touched it to it and just sucked it right in. I'll feed a little on the top to make sure it's in there good, but that's a perfectly quick tin. And then I just clean it off every time with the sponge. Next thing, we're going to go up here and we're going to put some resin down in here, and probably a couple drops worth. If I can get it to come out. Got a little bit there. Okay. Now again, build that up. And get it down in there. Suck it right in. Probably needs a little bit more solder. Alright, back at it here with part 2. I had to unclog the resin bottle. It wasn't coming out good enough. So you want to make sure you get, there we go. I got 2-3 good drops in there. Definitely helps a lot. Helps keep it so you don't have to put so much heat into it to get the solder to go in and soak into it. Here we go, get some solder on the iron. Just start putting it into the wire. There we go. And then what I like to do is we're going to get a good amount of solder on the end of here. This is going to be kind of fun to do with one hand, but so we're going to get this real close. This is where the alligator clip would probably be better, but I'm just going to do it by hand. Get it in there. It's definitely hot. We got it. Perfect. Those 2 wires made it together perfectly clean. Back to cleaning off our soldering iron tip, and that's done. So then that's why we run our heat shrink up over it. Cover that. And I'll take just a lighter, shrink that up. All right, now wire's done. Now on to the positive terminal. Same deal, about a 1/2 inch wide. Window we want to put in it. So we have our window there. Now we're going to figure out how we want to do the wire. These are going to be pretty close together, so we're going to move it up, run these together on the routing, and then figure out where we want to terminate this right here. Strip it back about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch. We can get this wire tightened up. One's good. Now get a couple good drops down on here. And you can see this is already starting to turn like a gold color. And when it's like that, it's best to just clean it off, start again, so it's clean, fresh solder. All the good elements or chemicals aren't cooked out of it. It'll work a lot better. Get it like that. Just apply it into there. Add a little bit more to build it up just a little bit, just like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and actually I'm gonna go ahead and get this a little better on the camera and use the clip. A little bit safer method of doing it. Let's use the clip like that. So I want to build up a good amount of solder on a clean tip of the iron. Get to where it's got like a nice little bubble to it. Kind of put some pressure on the clip to push them together. Oops, slip out on me there. We're going to have to reset that up. Okay. Redo our solder here. Get a little bubble. Let's kind of push them together. get it, make sure it all melted. Pull it off. There you go. Perfect. Let it loose. And we're ready to pull this up. And shrink it. Okay. Well, now on to part 3, where we terminate it for the battery. Alright, now we're on to part 3 of this. Terminating the ends here at the length you want. Putting on your XT. This one's going to have an XT90 connector. Black XT90 connector. Make sure that you have the male side for the ESC. Your battery will be the female side. You want to make sure that you obviously leave these wires long enough for if you need to move the battery forward or back in the car, so you don't have any issues there. It's typically not really a big deal to, you know, leave them just a little bit long. And so, you know, you can see here, we'll probably just cut them right about here, just right at the end. That way we got a little extra slack in case we need it for anything else or change battery configuration later on. So, like I say, as we look at it, this connector will sit back a little bit more, so you could shorten them up like maybe an extra 1/4 inch. And obviously you want these to run nice and tight routing together. Looks pretty close. We can cut it off. Alright, so next step is going to be to cut these back. You're going to want to cut them back to probably about, I'm going to say a 1/4 inch. This is the 12 gauge wires. Cut them back about 1/4 inch. Just kind of twist them together, keep them tight. A lot of little strands in this wire. Okay. My next step is back to a little bit of liquid resin. A couple drops on each one. We're going to go ahead and tin them. Clean tip on the soldering iron. A little solder puddle onto the tip. Put it underneath. Start feeding in a little bit of solder. When it has the liquid resin on there, you can hear it sizzle. You know it's working good. Okay. Next, we're going to go ahead and tin the connector. So to do that, what I like to do is set it up, the liquid resin, just kind of set the connector so the resin don't run out. We're just going to put a little bit down in here. You don't want to fill it up or anything, because then it makes it a little harder to get the wire in. So just put a little bit on the tip of the iron. Just get a little bit into the plug there. Flip it, do the other side. tip of the iron's kind of getting nasty, so clean it. A fresh solder. Just run that down in. And we got that. Alright, so now these XT90 connectors, they're marked positive and negative, so they can only go one way. We can get it to see, but that's the positive side. The angled side of the connector, chamfered side of the connector, that's going to be your negative side. Alright, so we have our negative wire over here, positive wire over here. We're going to go ahead and start with the positive wire. So try and position this where we can do it. It might be a little tricky. I think we might be better off this direction if it'll reach. Okay. Yeah, something like that'll work. Now the next thing you want to do, and don't forget about this because it's real easy to forget, is to put your little cover over the wires first. You want to run that little cover up on there. And now we're ready. So we have our positive side up. I'm going to put just a tiny bit of rosin down in there just to make sure it takes real easy. Go ahead and get a good ball of solder on the iron. Let it run down to the tip, so I kind of hold the iron upward so the solder runs downward. There's our little clip. Stick it down in there. And there you go. Hold it. I count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Should be good. You can see the solder bubbling out. I mean, you know it's got it all hot down inside there. Just hold it for a few seconds, that way you know it's the solder's cooled down enough to pull away. So our positive side's done. We're on the positive terminal. We got that right. We'll flip this thing over. So let's hit this negative side. Drops of resin. Clean the tip of the iron off good. Get a good bubble of solder on there. Grab onto it and try and kind of get it down in there. This one don't want to go, so I'm probably gonna have to kind of force it once it melts. There we go. So we melted it. It went down in 1, 2, 3. Should be good. Okay. Tip of our iron. So that is now secured down in there real nice. Definitely pull, make sure it ain't gonna come loose or anything, but it's in there nice. Slide our boot up. That covers it. There we go. XT90's installed. Alright, so now the next spot that we're gonna go to is soldering on the motor wires. And that'll be the next step. Okay. Now on to pretty much the last step of installing this ESC. On this car, let's say we got a 3.5 turn R1 motor, blueprinted, and it's a digital 3 ESC, 30 gram cap, XT90 connector. Like I said before, You want to leave a nice little gap between the ESC and the waterfall. You don't want to be pinching this sensor wire up against any other wires. You want to leave this thing floating around. Make sure it's getting a good clean signal. You want to be proactive about not creating some kind of weird problem with your car, or this thing getting some kind of interference off of the cap or some weird thing like that. I'd definitely suggest being careful about what you're doing, because you could create a gremlin and you never figure it out. So the next thing we're going to do here is go ahead and run our, on this one it's oriented C, B, and A. And one thing that I think is important when you set this up is you really want to have these wires the same length. You want to keep your A, B, and C phase wires the same length, because the coil windings in the motor are the same length or real close to it. So you want to keep everything the same so it doesn't throw anything out of whack. So whether you mount the ESC this direction, or in some cars you might mount it the other way, like in my Vanishing Point car, I have this thing turned 90 degrees. The wires run out the side and come in this way. But no matter how you do it, you want to make sure you figure out a way before you start soldering wires that you can get all these wires the same length. And like I say, real nice with this ESC, when you go in to program it, you can change the A, B, and C to CBA just by clicking the icon or clicking the little dot in the box. And that is a nice feature, because that allows you to mount this ESC and do the wiring either direction. And that's pretty important. That's really nice. So the other thing I'll say about these motor wires is you want to leave them a little bit long. If you end up having to solder a motor in and out a half a dozen times, you'll want to clip the wire off and put in a fresh, redo a fresh solder connection, retin the wire, reset it up, because the more you solder this on and off the motor, it builds up resistance in your connection, and you don't want that. It's going to cost you power, and it could cause who knows what. So on most of my cars, I try not to ever solder the motor in and out. I will actually service the motor inside the car, and leave it hooked to the ESC, the stator hooked to the ESC, and just pull the end bells off. You don't want to be unsoldering these wires if you don't have to. That's really what it comes down to. And that's another reason why on the blueprinted motors that I do, the option to go ahead and drill this oil hole in here, that makes it so you can oil this bearing in here without having to even take this end bell off the motor, which is a good situation to keep it so you don't have to mess with it. Makes it a lot simpler. Definitely want to keep oiling the bearings on these motors constantly. When they're spinning 100,000 RPMs, you can't have enough oil at the bearing. So, I try and oil the bearings at least every 3 runs is about the max I like to go. If I can remember to just make sure you do re-oil the bearings, 3-4 drops. I don't think you can have too much oil, so that's important too. So the way we're going to start this wire here is the C that's closest to us, so I'm going to go ahead and start with that one, and obviously the C terminal on the motor is the back one. So I'm going to run it, make sure it has a little extra slack over what it needs, and then I'm going to look at the B wire. I think we're going to go ahead and come underneath this one with the B wire. Like I say, we're going to try and keep them all about the same length, something like that, and then we'll come underneath that one with the A wire. So something like that to keep them all about the same length. That's what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the C. Get these 2 out of the way and work from there. So I figure I want this length, like I say, you want to add a little slack, especially the first go here. So keep a little bit of slack in the wire. It's not going to hurt you. But you know where you want it. Clip it. And on these, I like to strip it back about 1/8 of an inch. Just like that. So I'll go ahead and tin this wire. 2 drops of liquid. Tin it a little bit. A little extra solder on the tip. Just 1 drop on here is all you need. Hit it just real quick. Now you have a nice little bed of solder there. Use a little clip to grab the wire and get it ready to go. I'm gonna grab it pretty close to the end so you have real good control of it, because you're gonna want to set the direction. Now if you look, this solder is already starting to turn that gold color, and I don't like that, so clean it off. Start with fresh, good solder. That way you can get some nice chrome finish solder joints. A nice little, just a little bubble of solder there. Should be enough. Hold it right where you want it, the direction you want it, at the angle you want it. And just press down. 1, 2, 3. Pull it off. Well, one's on there. Now when you use the bigger wire, the 10 gauge, I like to offset them on the terminals of the motor. You're going to want to put the B right dead in the middle, and then your A and C, because the wire's so big, these little pads aren't super, they're not super wide, so I kind of will offset one a little bit that way to the, you know, the C to the right side, and then the A to the left side just a little bit, just to make sure there's a gap in between all the wires. Obviously you don't want them to ever touch, so just be careful of that. With the 12 gauge stuff, there's plenty of room really. And now we're ready to go ahead and figure out the length for our B wire and cut it. So like I say, we're trying to keep them even, so it'll be a little bit lower there, something like that. Marked pretty much with the end of my finger. Cut it, strip it, real straightforward. Probably need to do just a little more on the strip there. Go get the end of that wire tinned. And then drop liquid on there. And just hit it. It just takes just a tap. It'll transfer solder over to that connector on the motor. And then we want to go ahead and build this up. It's got a little bubble of solder on it. Take our clip and grab it real quick. Right towards the end. And actually we want to run this wire underneath, so we clip it, get it at the direction we want it to go, the angle we want it to go. One, two, three. pull it off. I probably got the angle just a little better on that one, but it's not too bad. I think it'll work. So next, we'll just do the A wire. Something like that. I'm going to go ahead and fix this B wire. I'd like it to be a little bit straighter with the other one, just so it's not over rubbing against the A wire. Oh, it's not too hard to fix. Just get a little bit of solder on here. I'll straighten it out. There we go. Make sure it's cooled down good, and then you can pull it off. There we go. Much better. All right. Like I say, now we're going to set up this A wire. Let's do the length something like that. Looks pretty close. Maybe a little shorter since it's farther away. Something like that. Should make it where all these wires are fairly close to equal length. You'll kind of know because you can look at what you've cut off, and they'll be pretty close. Like that, it's within about a 1/4 of an inch, I'd say. And the other wires, well, yeah, they're all within about a 1/4 of an inch of one another. So we know we got them close. Go ahead and strip our wire. Still just a tiny bit more on that one. I like to push the solder into the wire once you put the iron underneath, and then feed the solder into the wire. Then you know that it's going in. You know you got it throughout the whole wire all the way around. That'll help you out a lot. Now let's go ahead and put a little drop over here. Go ahead and tin that. Clean this off. We already got the wire routed underneath the other wires like we wanted it. So we're going to go and build up a good amount of solder here. Get our clip to grab it. Set it at the angle we want. Let's kind of rock it back and forth on there. 1, 2, 3. Should be good. And there we go. So there we have the ESC fully wired into the cap, battery connector, terminated to the motor. Some nice solder, nice looking solder joints on the motor. It's hard to get the focus because it's so shiny, but they look pretty good. And only other thing I would say is if you are going to change the wire on the caps, make sure you remember where the positive is. Either take a picture or whatever before you remove these wires, because they are not marked either way. The only way they're marked is by this wire here. This cover that R1 puts on there to make it look all cool, that covers up where which one's positive and negative. So you got to go off of how they did it out here. So don't take those off without remembering where they're going to go back to. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Just take your time. you know, make sure you got the right tools. Make sure you got a good soldering iron. Like I say, this one goes to 900 or 890 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty important to have a soldering iron that's got some oomph to it. And as far as, you know, good solder, the liquid rosin, and the clip. The clip is good. This little soldering jig is nice. These are cheap. You get them from like A-Main, like $10. That's a real handy thing to have. I'm gonna put a soldering kit up on the website with all these little things, so that way you guys can just have everything you need in one spot to get it, because otherwise you're searching all over the internet to get all these things gathered up. The other thing, the heat shrink that I used was just this Dorman 87500 heat shrink kit. It's got all the different sizes, and it's pretty high quality stuff. It seems to work real well, and it's pretty heavy duty, so it's good stuff. So hopefully this will help you guys install everything you know, properly, get it set up right so you don't have any issues, and it should perform a lot better set up right. And I guess until next time, thanks for buying our stuff.